This is Right On Radio, the voice of resistance and reconquest.
Welcome to Right On Radio. My name is Daniel Friberg.
And I'm John Morgan.
And I'm Jonas de Geer.
And joining us today, we have Youssef Fakhouri, a Lebanese-Hungarian Catholic social and human rights activist aiming to raise the issue of contemporary persecution of Christians in the West. Welcome, Youssef.
Hi, thank you.
And could you start by telling us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Well, as you mentioned, I am a Lebanese-Hungarian Catholic. My father is Lebanese Christian from South Lebanon, from the town of Saida. My mother is Hungarian from Transylvania. I will talk about persecution of Christians because this is something my families have experienced. From the part of my mother, they were living in the Romania of Ceausescu era, when it was very dangerous to be Hungarian first and Christian also. As we know, communist dictatorships oppressed Christians and churches directly, so practicing religion was considered contrary and opposed to the communist regime itself, which was true. And so they had to be discreet, and the fear is still living in Central Europe until today. And my father is Lebanese Christian from South Lebanon, and his family, my paternal grandparents and their relatives and their grandchildren, so the Fakhouri clan, which is around 200-300 people, had to flee South Lebanon in April 1985 when Islamists took over locally during the Lebanese civil war. And the same as what is happening now in Syria under ISIS, Islamists gave Christians ultimatum of 3 days to convert to Islam or pay the jizya, which is a tax for non-Muslims, but which is very hard to pay during wartime. So they had to convert to Islam or pay extra tax or flee because they would be killed. So they had to flee, and they fled to the Bekaa Valley, and they returned after the end of the war in 1992. And we went to live in Saida from 1994. And I studied in a Catholic school center, which had a Muslim majority among students and also among teachers. There were no problems when we were children between Christians and Muslims. As we were growing up, problems were becoming more and more because of politics and public issues. The religion was part of everyday life and was part of public issues and politics even. So problems were becoming more frequent, but still there were no conflicts. And when I came to Hungary, to Central Europe, I was surprised that I speak of persecution of Christians and people don't understand what I am talking about. I don't say they don't want to understand, but they do not understand what I was talking about. And then I was shocked, and I had to realize that the media, the culture, the TV, the films, the radios do not mention Christians of the Middle East as frequently as it should. So people have no idea that Christians still exist in the Holy Land, in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Egypt. All these countries were Christian countries before Islam entered in the 7th century. And it took many, many centuries for Islam to become a majority religion in these areas. So people are ignorant of the fact that Christians exist, and they do not know that there is persecution currently against Christianity and against Christian believers in Middle Eastern countries. Not only in Middle Eastern countries, but I know Middle Eastern countries better because I speak Arabic and I lived there. So in 2010, I started informing in an organized way. I joined the Christian Democratic Youth Alliance, and since 2012, we started the Pro-Christi project for Christians. We started organizing conferences, lectures, and I give interviews in radios and newspapers, and I aim to raise the issue in the media, and I think that the West should re-explore its Christian identity, and we speak a lot about human rights here, but when the victims are Christians, human rights are not mentioned. Well, I realized in the meanwhile that people first should know that there are around 20 million Christians still in the Middle East, and there are lots of people who struggle and risk their lives every day to remain Christians, and also there are lots of Muslims who risk their lives to become Christians. So by talking about human rights, we should find ways to protect these people.
Of course, there's obviously a strong media bias against Christians and pro-Islam in the Western liberal media, or pretty much all liberal media in Europe and the West as a whole. And I think most of us here know why. But what is your take on that, Youssef? Why do you think there is such a strong anti-Christian bias in the media that they don't even mention these pretty horrific persecutions that is taking place against Christians in the Middle East?
Well, I can mention two causes. First of all, in the West, there was a Nazi dictatorship, which sometimes pretended it is Christian. Also, it was not. They also killed hundreds of Catholic priests and Protestant pastors also, apart of Jews. But there was only a Nazi dictatorship. Meanwhile, in Central and Eastern Europe, we had a communist dictatorship also. So not only right-wing extremists were ruling in this area, but also left-wing extremists. So we know the disadvantage of harsh left rule, and this is something people did not experience in the West. So people are turning against religion because they think Christianity is the cause of wars and suffering in human lives, which is not true. This is the first point. The other point is that the Muslim Arabs, especially those of the Gulf, have hundreds of billions of dollars which are reserves. They don't spend them on African poverty, on reduction of poverty, on education of poor people, but they spend it on building of big mosques in Western European cities. They buy the media, the banks, the big football clubs. They buy huge shares in hotel companies, in big industrial companies. So they have a very strong pressure, political pressure capability. And with the ignorance of the Western public, it is very simple. It is not hard at all to say to the Western public that Muslims are the most persecuted and Christians are not persecuted, and it is very easy for them to hide the presence of Christians. Luckily, as more and more attacks are happening, there are more and more people who know that Christians are present in the Middle East, and contemporary Christian persecution is something which happens. Pope Benedict XVI made a very big step forward when in 2010 December he mentioned that Christians are the most persecuted religious group in the world. So in our days, and since then the Christian leaders, even Pope Francis, mentioned that today there are more Christian martyrs than in the first centuries, which is true in numbers. There are more people killed for being Christians. In percentage, luckily, this is much less. Well, we have a very big work to do regarding informing the public on the personal stories of those who prefer to die as Christian rather than to convert to Islam. And these are the two main points. First of all, the lack of experience of communist rule. The second is the petrodollar lobby in the West.
What's your view on Israel? Because, I mean, after all, that is the most important power in the Middle East. What's their role in the whole situation?
Well, Israel has a negative role regarding Middle Eastern Christian communities. For example, during the Lebanese Civil War, the South Lebanese Christians were direct allies of the Israelis, and Israelis abandoned their allies, so tens of thousands of Christians in the southern Lebanese border area had to flee to the west or to Israel, and this led to the rise of radical Shiite movement Hezbollah. And Israel also is threatened. Also, there is a negative role for Israel in supporting Islamist movements in the Middle East, like for example in Syria, there is the Assad government which does not recognize Israel, which means that there is no official peace truce between the two countries, and this is because Syria is the ally of Iran, and Israel wants to reduce the power and influence of the Iranian state in the Middle East. Now, the problem is that those who are able to rule Syria are Islamists and hardline Islamists, which is not good nor for Christians, neither for Syrian Muslims, Sunnis, neither for Israel. So Israel and Turkey and the US contributed to the destruction of a very stable state in the Middle East and to the exodus of a Christian population of 2.5 million. Luckily, there is always around 1 million in Syria, but most of the people fled, and Israel is looking at its short-term interests and is playing the game of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, even if the enemy of its enemy is a much more dangerous enemy. So I am not satisfied with the role of Israel in the Middle East.
Are you sure it's a short-term interest, or is there sort of a long-term plan to cleanse the Middle East of Christians? I know many years ago, some 16 years ago or so, I did an interview with the PLO representative in Stockholm, Dr. Eugene Maklouf, and he said that, or he explained, which was fairly new to me, that the first thing after sort of Israel was installed was to get rid of the Christians. That was the sort of main priority.
Well, I don't think it is the priority for Israel to suppress the Christians, but I think you heard about the book of Samuel Huntington, The Clash of Civilizations, when the Western civilization and the Islamic one will clash. Well, to make this possible, it is important to destroy the bridges, and the bridges between the two are the Christians of the Middle East, because they were the ones who contributed a lot in translating the Western accomplishments to Arabic, and the establishment of medical faculties and other sciences introduced to Arabic were largely thanks to Christian people who were much closer to the West because of their religion than the Muslims. And also, even during the Crusades, the techniques which were in the hands of Islamic rulers, lots of scientists, most of them were Christians, and they contributed in the swap of techniques and technologies and knowledge to the Western people. So it is important to destroy the bridges to annihilate the Middle Eastern Christian communities, to make a total war between the West and Islamic world. So I don't think it is the priority of Israel, of the Jewish state itself, but maybe it is a Masonic plan. I don't know.
Well, definitely I've noticed, being American myself, that in the American popular consciousness, people always presume that the Palestinians are all Muslims. So, when you talk to, especially people who are, Christian Zionists or whatever, they'll say, well, what Israel is doing, the suppression of the Palestinians is justified because they're fighting Islamization. Although, I will point out to them that, well, many Palestinians are Christians, but a lot of Americans, either aren't aware of this or don't see it as significant, which I think is unfortunate, really.
Well, the problem is that people in the West look at the names and look at how people look like. If they see they are brown and they have names like Youssef or Hisham or similar names which are Arabic, not Muhammad and Mustafa and Ismail, but Arabic names, people immediately think these are Muslims, but no.
Yes.
These are Christians, and Muslims are those who were Christians and converted to Islam by faith or by fear. And those who are Christians are those who resisted the oppression and kept their religion. And people in the West do not know this, unfortunately.
Yes, that's definitely true. But I think there is some attention paid in the media, but only when it's convenient. Not just in Palestine, but I'm referring to the Middle East in general. They will occasionally bring it up, but only if it's to justify some kind of American intervention or whatever, but not not in any other context usually.
The problem is that there are more and more pogroms and massacres which need to be mentioned. For example, in June 2014, when Islamic State occupied Mosul, immediately they started marking the houses of Christians with the Arabic N letter, which means Nasrani, Nazarene, and after 3-4 weeks, the Western public the mainstream media had to mention this issue. We need to say that we have a very big thanks to the Russian media and Russian military in preserving Christians in the Middle East, especially by helping the Syrian government preserve its territories, and the Russian media, which raises awareness on the Christian presence in the Middle East. Now, regarding 2014 in June and in August, when Islamic State invaded the Nineveh plain, there were hundreds of thousands of Christians who were made homeless. This issue had to be mentioned by the mainstream media, and more people started to be volunteers to go to North Iraq to help these people. More and more Christian NGOs have expanded their activities to North Iraq, like, for example, Christian Solidarity International or Barnabas Fund or French or German Christian NGOs. And also there were some massacres. For example, I am sure everybody heard about the 21 Copts who were beheaded on the Libyan seashore in Egypt.
Yes.
They were very poor people. They were aware that they are going to be killed if they do not convert to Islam, but no, they kept their Christian faith and they kept strong. And they knew they were going to be beheaded. They had no doubts, but no, their last word was, "Oh Jesus, help me!" And they were beheaded on the seashore. Even before it, I don't know if you heard about the massacre of Maspero in Cairo. 9th of October 2011. Christians made a big protest from Shubra, the Christian quarter in Cairo, to the national TV headquarters, and around 40-50,000 participated in the march, which was protesting against the destruction of a church in Upper Egypt in Aswan. The army responded brutally, and APCs ran in the crowd. Around 24 people were killed and 230 were heavily injured. The Western media spoke about the issue for about 2-3 days. Then there was a complete silence on the Christians of Egypt. And I, for example, contacted the vice president of the European People's Party Parliament group, the Hungarian one, Laszlo Suryan, and he was delegate of Fidesz-KDNP, and I spoke to him, and he said yes, he is aware of the issue. He is in contact with Egyptian Christian NGOs in Brussels. The next day, immediately, they wrote an open letter in which they condemned the persecution of Christians in Egypt, and they asked the Egyptian state to protect the minorities' rights, to condemn those who are responsible of this massacre. And around 100 MEPs signed the open letter within 2 days, and they took the petition to Catherine Ashton, who was the quasi-foreign affairs ministers of the EU, and she pointed out that she does not agree that it is persecution of Christians, because it is a very strong word. And yeah, this is the problem, that media is not talking enough about it, and politicians, there are lots of Christian politicians who would react, but if they do not have the masses support, they will not have the power to react. On the 1st of December 2015, I was in Brussels, and I took part in a conference in the European Parliament, which was about the persecution of Christians. There were bishops from Bosnia, there was a bishop from Egypt, there was a Chaldean priest who was born in Turkey, there was a Eritrean Christian woman who was imprisoned in a container for 2 years for remaining Christian. So what had to be said, it was said. And I was just said that there was one camera. So there are conferences in which the people speak about the problem, but the media coverage is very weak. And still, the president of the European Parliament, Martin Schulz, was invited to the end of the conference. And he said that, 20 years ago, people would laugh if somebody mentioned persecution of Christians. Now everybody knows it is an evidence, but still, he said very diplomatically that we should speak more about the issue. More and more people should be aware of this issue, so that when there is a petition, hundreds of thousands need to sign it within weeks. Currently, there is a petition ongoing in Citizen Go. It's a petition to the United Nations that the United Nations should turn more attention to the endangered Christian communities in Syria and Iraq. So still, the petition was launched 4 days ago, and still there are around 120,000 who have signed it. So
that's very good. And just to mention to our listeners that we will, of course, provide a link to that petition.
Yeah, so it is important for us to talk about the issue, and more and more people should know about it. And when more and more people know about it, there will be a stronger reaction from politicians, even from those who are not Christians, because it is important to speak about human rights. And yeah, we are talking about persecuted people, and Christians are those who are most persecuted, both in numbers, both in percentage. So yeah,
sounds good.
And this is a way that in which people can re-explore the Christian identity, what means to be Christian, what means to be suffered, to see the examples, to see personal stories, faces, and this is how the West will re-explore Christianity and become Christian through Christian solidarity.
Exactly, and we're actually getting close to the music break, and we'll of course continue the discussion on this topic after the break, as well as another important topic, which is the current ongoing Islamization of Europe and what we can do to resist it in the most efficient way. But first, we'll listen to von Tronstal with The Saints Are Coming. Bye.
Till the clouds unroll and you come home, the line went. The shadows through brains and your descent, your descent.
This is Right On Radio. Arctos is currently holding a Kickstarter campaign to fund the translation of 3 of the French New Right author Guillaume Fay's works into English. Please see the program description for a link to details about the campaign and about how you can be among the first to receive the books when they are published.
And there we are back, and we're talking to Youssef Fakhouri about the persecution of Christians in the Middle East and also the Islamization of the world. And now we're going to talk about the Islamization of Europe. This is a quite real phenomenon we have going on here, with basically a colonization taking place. We have a huge migrant flow coming into Europe, primarily of Muslims, and it's supported by the elites in most or pretty much all Western European countries. And it's also funded heavily by the Saudi government and various other actors in Saudi Arabia, financing the building of mosques on European soil. We have a huge amount of mosques being built all over Western Europe right now, and churches.
And the United States as well?
Yeah, and the United States as well. I mean, Europe and the West, basically, but especially Western Europe. And in France, we even recently saw an old, beautiful church being demolished. So what we're seeing now basically is Christianity being pushed away, churches being torn down, and mosques popping up all over the place. And of course, all of us here care deeply about the survival of the European civilization and its heritage, the Christian heritage as well as the pagan heritage, at least for me. But what are your feelings about this, Youssef? I mean, you've seen it up close in what's happening in the Middle East, how Christians are now a minority, a very harshly persecuted minority. Do you envision something similar in the future in Europe if we don't stop the current trends?
Well, the problem in Europe is, first of all, de-Christianization and political correctness, which is paired very much with double standards. Muslims are treated in a very advantaged way, meanwhile Christians are treated in a disadvantaged way. I will tell you just an example. If there is a discussion and the Muslim says is offended by a subject, he immediately says the counterpart is racist. This is especially true when they talk about Islam or building a mosque or something. But for example, me also, I have lots of comments on Facebook regarding LGBT lobby, which I see a threat to Christian civilization. They say all kinds of adjectives because of my name, but me, for example, I don't say you are racist. And for the moment in Europe, if somebody attacks LGBT lobby, even if he's Arab, so there are double standards in the way the people are treated, which is contrary to the Christian system of justice and the system of justice of the Renaissance and the Enlightenment. Then the de-Christianization is important to mention because the drop in the church attendance, in the mass attendance, and the drop in the fertility rate, the number of abortions and before it, the divorces, and now euthanasia, which is being introduced in most European countries, is all caused by de-Christianization, by banning Christianity from everyday life. Now, this happened already 100 years ago, but deleting Christianity from the collective memory is what is happening now, and this is contributing contributing strongly to current processes. The problem is that it's not that Muslims are having lots of children. The problem is that they are having this from the taxpayers, which is not the case in Islamic countries. Mosques are built in a fast way, even in Arabic countries, but even Christians, they marry, they have 3-4 children, they build churches. There are restrictions on building churches, but they struggle to build churches. So this struggle, this sacrifice is not present in Europe anymore, and this is the problem. this is the source of most problems in Europe currently. I want to tell you about a story in Alexandria in the end of Ramadan, and in most bigger Arabic cities, hundreds of thousands and even millions participate to prayers in the streets. But the traffic is not stopped. In New York, in Madison Square, Muslims stop the traffic when they pray, which is an extreme stupidity and naivety from Americans. But this happens even in Milano, even in London, even in Paris and other big European cities, and this is something that needs to be banned. And the concept of human rights, they want to save every person who is coming. Meanwhile, they finance abortions. Again, double standards, which needs to be stopped. Briefly, this is my opinion on the issue. So Islamization, Islam is spreading, but Islam is spreading because Christianity is no more present. So Islam is present in Islamic countries also, but Christianity also is present strongly, and Christians are making sacrifices, and many are even sacrificing their own life to remain Christian. And in Europe, this is something not present at all, but at least they need to know about it. So this would be a kind of solution, I think.
So what Youssef is basically saying is that we need some sort of revival and a return to the Christian past in European civilization.
Yes, we need to return to the traditional Christianity and not to be naive and not to misinterpret Christianity. Now, regarding the migration, I guess this is the most hot topic currently. I spoke with an Egyptian Coptic Orthodox priest who said that we asked him how to deal with this issue according to the Bible. He said, according to the Bible, there are two important things. First of all, there is a verse in which it is said, accept the poor in your houses. Now, there is another verse also. Now, first of all, this acceptance does not mean that the state should accept them and finance their welfare from the taxpayers' money. No, the people should help the people. Personal contacts are important in a civilization, in every civilization. The second, in the Evangelium of John, it is written, close your doors in front of those who want to change or make doubts in your faith. Now, what does this mean? This means in the practice that, okay, Muslims want to have a mosque or 3-4 mosques, okay, they need it. But to change the image, the landscape of the cities, to give a totally new view to the cities, like, for example, the Europe's highest minaret in Köln, in the city of Cologne. This is something which needs to be refused according to Christian teaching. And currently, whether we look at Protestant, mainstream Protestant churches, or even the current leadership of the Catholic Church, there is a kind of, angelic approach to Christianity, which is totally false, because the love before everything applies to the relationship between people. But Christianity is part of the culture and part of the history and part of the public issues and politics. And we need to apply the just war theory, which was introduced by Saint Augustine of Hippo. Most Catholics even don't know about this theory, but in Catholic doctrine, war can be justified when you are liberating someone, when the war is preventing attack, invasion of your own country, when you cause less damage to the enemy than a war in your own territory. This is why the Crusades also were launched, to protect the Christian majority from the Islamic aggressive minorities rule. Regarding Europe, first of all, it stopped it should stop killing itself through abortion, through fertility limiting medicaments, and so on. And the concept of sacrifice and duty should be reintroduced in the society. Now, of course, we need wars, we need hard times to understand this. The welfare states should be deconstructed. Islamists should not receive state funds in the West, especially because they don't receive state funds in their own countries. So the West is somehow attracting these fanatics, especially because the doors are open and
we provide all sorts of subsidies and welfare, as you mentioned, to them. We provide all sorts of financial incentives.
Are not prosecuted.
Yeah.
This is the issue which is about double standards.
Absolutely. We have very visible double standards. And regarding this need for a return to traditional Christianity in order to be able to save European civilization from the onslaught of radical Islam, I'm sure Jonas agrees.
Oh, absolutely.
I would like some things here. We have to fight radical Islam by applying the issues which are positive on their side. For example, I mentioned sacrifice. In Islamic countries, Christian minorities have a very big responsibility to remain Christian. Now, sacrifice means that premarital sex is forbidden. It is not punished by death like in the case of Muslims, but the parents have a very big responsibility in taking care of their children. And separating girls and boys in lots of cases is an important issue. Not only now we are condemning the way Islamists are segregating women apart in English universities, but somehow this is a kind of prevention of premarital sex and similar issues. So there are lots of issues with it's a very complicated issue which needs to be studied, and the positive things in Islamic schools should be implemented by Christians. For example, the total rejection of LGBT lobby, and I know that in UK schools there are lots of courses of indoctrination of the LGBT agenda, like, for example, masturbation, showing what masturbation is to young children in the primary schools. This is something unacceptable.
Of course, and it's horrible, and it takes place all over the West. I mean,
but it's a very important point, because I mean, a lot of the time when people criticize Islam, it's the argument goes along the lines that, well,
from a liberal perspective, basically.
Exactly, you know, they're sort of anti-liberal. They're against women wearing short skirts and screwing around, and they're against masturbation and etc. etc.
So this is an important issue because there are lots of women in the West, which are European white women, who are converting to Islam because they want a stable family. So the stability in Christian families, this is something which has become weaker, and women need stability. There are lots of women who are independent, they want to work, but still in every culture there are women who want a strong man and a family which is stable. And in Islamic culture, in Islamic families, this is much more frequent, and Christians also should restart this.
Same thing with many men, actually, that sort of turned to Islam because
and that is proof of the need for tradition in Europe. I mean, the liberal society has failed. I mean, everyone is miserable in liberalism, in the liberal society, where everyone is an individual instead of part of a collective, and they can do whatever they want.
I want to tell you a story.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead, Youssef. Yeah.
In Budapest also, there are some Islamic preachers. They come to me and they say in Islam it is forbidden to make a sexual contact with women outside of marriage. I say in Christianity it is stricter because you should not think about it, because when you think about it, the evil enters your mind and slowly you will commit that sin. And the Islamic preacher that just looked at me and he was surprised because he did not hear this from anyone in Hungary. Yeah, I am Catholic from the Middle East, and application of the religion in everyday life is not easy, but there are things European Christians, even European practicing Christians, don't know. And that Islamic preacher just looked at me and I saw in his eyes that he was afraid he cannot convert me. And yeah, there are lots of small details which have a very big meaning.
Yeah, Youssef, are you Maronite?
I am Greek Catholic, Melkite.
Greek Catholic, okay.
So Jonas, what is your take on this? Do you believe that of course this question is purely rhetorical because I already know the answer, but do you believe that traditional Catholicism is a solution to the problems of Europe?
I wouldn't say the solution, but yes, in a sense, I do think we have to go back to our spiritual roots, and I think these are our spiritual roots. I mean, I'm not, when it comes to paganism and what have you, that is so far back in the past, it doesn't really count. So I go with Hilaire Belloc on that one, and I'll say that Europe is the faith is Europe. So yeah, no, I think we definitely have to. And I mean, if we look at actual facts, Europe has been weakened. Every European nation has been weakened by secularization.
Of course, secularization was a horrible thing. Apparently, I mean, it went from
it's gone from bad to worse. I mean,
Secularization is partly because of the misinterpretation of the history. For example, everywhere I go, every book I read, 95% they say the Crusades were a Christian project to diminish internal conflicts and instead conquer an Islamic land and spread hatred among Muslims, which is not true.
No, it's not true.
Crusades were to liberate the Christian majorities in the Middle East. They were to protect the Eastern Christian Empire. They were launched to protect the pilgrim itinerary, and also in Iberia, the Christians were enslaved by the Muslim rulers. This is something
absolutely. But if you look at the Crusades,
and also the Inquisition, the Spanish Inquisition, in 300 years it had around 3,500 casualties, as per the official data of the committee, which made the analysis of the books of the Inquisition in the mid-1990s. And they speak about hundreds of thousands being killed every year, which is not true. So the true history should be retold to the Europeans, and the taboos should be destroyed. And also, in the West, there is currently a big, wide series of scandals regarding the pedophile priests. Now, there are some studies which show that 90% of these cases are because priests have homosexual, intentions. And in 2005, Pope Benedict XVI made a decree that those accepted in seminaries should be controlled. Do they have some bad habits, intentions? And so lots of taboos need to be destroyed, and by this secularization can be slowed down.
It has to be sort of reversed. Europe has to return to the faith.
There was also a question that traditional Catholicism, is it the solution? Well, conservative Protestantism, the Protestant ethic described by Max Weber, also is a solution for the nations which have been Protestant historically, like, for example, Scandinavians or North Germany or even Great Britain, Scotland. The problem is that the issue of suffering is rejected and a hedonistic lifestyle is instead implemented. We need to know better Pakistani Christians, Egyptian Christians, Nigerian Christians. Their stories need to be told more often in the West so that the Christian faith can become stronger once again.
Well, I don't think stories about persecution of Nigerian Christians will be of that much help in strengthening Christianity in Europe because it's too far away culturally, ethnically, and so forth. But anyways, to provide some alternative perspective to this, John, as an Indo-European traditionalist, what is your take on this? What do you view as the ideal kind of return to tradition for Europe to survive?
Well, I don't actually disagree with anything that anyone has just said. I mean, I agree. I mean, in order for Europe to survive, it needs to get a real sense of identity again. And of course, a sense of authentic identity has to be rooted in the sacred. And I think this is a big if under current circumstances, at least in Western Europe and the US. But, it would be, if traditional Catholicism were to make a resurgence and actually, return to the center stage of European life. I mean, even though I'm not Catholic, I would certainly support that. I mean, obviously, even the Catholicism of today is highly problematic, when it comes to preserving Europe, and we have the Pope, actually encouraging more mass immigration into Europe. I mean, that's a problem for the European identity. But I don't think that would be happening if traditional Catholicism, which, was very firmly pro-European, were to be revived. I mean, I think the only place where we might disagree, and I'm not even certain because nobody has really addressed it. I wouldn't actually want Christian values and Christian law, as it were, to be applied, universally throughout the West. I mean, I think that at one time that might have been possible, but if we look at Western Europe and America today, I mean, in any foreseeable future I can see for America, people would never accept Catholicism as the dominant religion. I mean, even,
I want to tell you something, that Catholicism, the meaning of the word Catholic is universal. So traditionalist Catholicism is if we have a person who is a good, faithful Catholic and practices his religion, he cannot be anti-immigration. He cannot say no to refugees. He can say no to migrants, but not to refugees. Now, there is a doctrine in the Catholic Church made by St. Thomas Aquinas about immigration, which is about if a population, if they want to live in another place, they need to accommodate. And if they want to force their habits and make a kind of colonization, they should be banned. Well, this is something which is said by the European right wing. Now, traditional Catholicism is pro-European because it has been majority in Europe for centuries. But if we look at the expansion of the Catholic Church in Africa and East Asia and in China currently, we cannot say that the future of the Catholic Church is Europe, but it is the whole world. And Pope Benedict XVI also mentioned that true Christians are a creative minority. Now, this creative minority, maybe they will be a minority throughout the whole world, maybe even in Europe, but this is the way Christianity will survive, by people who make sacrifices and preserve their habits, traditions, and religion.
Yeah, but I disagree there, Youssef. I don't think that these people can sort of be the center of Catholicism. That will always be Europe. It will always be Rome, if you will. You can't outsource that to Nigeria or China or what have you. I mean, even though these people might convert, but Christian civilization is fundamentally European. And if Europe goes, so will Christianity, I'm pretty sure. Or so will Catholicism, I should say.
Yeah, there is a misunderstanding about Catholicism. Now, the center of Catholicism is Rome. Now, the center of the Coptic Church is the seat of Patriarchate of Alexandria. Now, the Coptic Church also has more and more Chinese Indian, African faithful, and even priests. But the center of the religious center, administrative center, is Alexandria, because this has been historically where the apostles went. And Christ said to St. Peter, "You are the rock of the church." So he is buried in Rome, so the church is based in Rome, but Catholicism, universalism, this is something, it has a meaning that the religion is universal and valid to every human being. Even if 90% of Catholics will be in China and Africa, they will...
No, I agree, but my point is, and I mean, obviously, this is not sort of a dogmatic statement in any way, but my point is that I think that if Europe becomes completely secularized, the Asian and African Catholics will pretty soon be lost. I do think so.
Yeah, I would agree.
I think Europe is the heartland of Catholicism, always will be.
Well, there was the Holy Land, which was the heartland of Christianity, and in the first century...
Well, you could say that. Yeah, you could say that the Middle East is in one sense as well. Yeah, sure.
So the Middle East was the heartland and still an important source of traditions. And if it disappears, the Western Christianity also may lose its roots. And if Western Christianity will fail, then Christianity and evangelization in China and Africa also may fail. So it will not be a traditional Catholic as we know it, but a kind of biblical interpretation. But
it might sound funny, but
if we want to preserve Europe, Christianity should be practiced, and yeah.
Well, my take on this is that to preserve and protect the European civilization, we obviously need some sort of religion. I mean, we can't expect people to be willing to sacrifice their lives in protection of Europe and European civilization out of some sort of atheism or just simple ideology. So
just for the sake of liberalism or sake of freedom, like we say in the U.S. So.
Even less for the sake of liberalism. I mean, who would want to sacrifice their lives for liberalism? That will never happen. I mean, that goes completely contrary to the belief of liberalism.
But the concept, it is important to mention that the concept of human rights and internationalism, these are all sourced from the Western Christianity, which is Catholicism. And even liberalism, the freedom of thought, the freedom of individual thinking also is from the Western Christian doctrine itself. So, yeah.
Of course.
And these are good things, but they've been sort of hijacked by our enemies and they've been distorted.
Yes, and also I would like to stress the point that, I mean, liberalism, as it is interpreted today, it means that everyone is just an individual who should try to seek maximum pleasure and joy for himself and not care about anyone else. And it's pretty hard to motivate people to sacrifice themselves, higher cause, or take any risk whatsoever if they are...
It is very hard to make sacrifices when they do not realize that there is suffering. Now, we need to highlight that, for example, an abortion is the killing of a child who is not born yet. Now, to say to someone, don't kill him, please give him in adoption. Now, we need families who have children and they want to adopt. So, this is sacrifice, and the churches need to be more effective in this, in highlighting human rights. So I tell always priests that you have much bigger task than to speak about spirituals. You need to be activists of these subjects. Now, there is an opposition within the clergy from the higher levels also. It has historical level also. So, the issue is not easy.
No, it isn't. And before we wrap this up, because we're getting kind of close to the end of this excellent podcast, I would like to pose the question, is there any realistic alternative to traditional Christianity for Europe? I mean, for example, some sort of Indo-European tradition like paganism. Is there is there even a viable option of reviving paganism in Europe and making that into the religion that will help save Europe from extinction? What do you say,
I'm sorry,
John?
I'm sorry, Daniel. That's a contradiction in terms, because you can't revive a tradition. It's not a tradition.
Okay, yeah, reboot a tradition.
Reconstruct is, I think, what they.
Yeah. Reconstruct. Actually, and it's. I mean, there are actually quite prosperous Indo-European traditions which we can draw power from to kind of recreate the pre-Christian tradition of Europe. I mean, we have.
But I would have thought that, per definition, a tradition is something that is handed on.
Yeah.
Of course, you're right, Jonas. I mean, there's no book that we can go and look at to find out how the ancient Odinists practice their religion. I mean, it's 90% of it is lost, if not more. So yeah, you're right. Any attempt to revive it now is, even the more serious people I know who are involved in those circles will say, it's always going to be, there's going to have to be a certain amount of innovation and invention. But there's
no, but I mean, I'm just stressing the fact that sort of it's not a tradition. Then it can be possibly a sort of viable belief system, and I know people who are neo-pagans or who just want to be called pagans, etc., etc. But it's not a tradition. A tradition, per definition, it requires continuity.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with that. But I mean, there are.
I think that's what Daniel was saying. We can draw in Hinduism and some of the other Zoroastrianism.
Zoroastrianism and Hinduism is to living Indo-European traditions, which share a lot of similarities. Well, Buddhism as well, to some extent, of course, which share a lot of similarities to the pre-Christian pagan religions of Europe. So it might be possible to kind of draw from that and kind of in some way.
Yeah, no, fair enough.
Personally, I don't think paganism is a possibility for Europe, because paganism is based on tribalism. So nations before Christianity were tribes, and each nation had its own beliefs. And Christianity was the one which united Europe somehow, which said that, okay, there are nations. Every nation should have some traditions, some pre-Christian traditions introduced in Christianity, some habits which are locals, some pilgrimages which are very much local. But there is one God. Everybody is created by God, regardless of the language, of the race. And paganism would not give Europe unity. It would create stronger nations, maybe, but these nations will keep fighting against each other.
Well, I don't think that we would necessarily have to revive paganism or reconstruct to go along with the criticism that Jonas made. I don't think we would have to go back to that sort of internecine conflict in Europe. I think it would be possible perhaps to have something that would have a more European sense than we had in ancient times. Although I hasten to add, though, I think Dan was about to ask me this before, but I mean, I certainly, if we go to thousands of years, who knows what will happen. But if we're talking about the immediate future, I don't think that reconstructed neo-paganism in Europe and the US is going to lead to anything significant. I mean, I think it will remain a significant subculture, but I think it's something that still seems too weird to the majority of people, and it doesn't have the force behind it that the major religions have. So I don't see that as the thing that Europeans and European Americans in the US are going to rally around. It might be something for a small number of people that will motivate them, but I don't think it's ever going to be the
No, and I mean, I can add as a traditional Catholic that, given the state of the contemporary Catholic Church and the way the Pope behaves and what have you, I can't see the Church becoming sort of the bulwark of the West. It was just some 50 years ago, but it certainly is not anymore.
And personally, I'm open for pretty much anything that will help us preserve and protect European civilization against the onslaught of hostile foreign groups and entities that wants to destroy us and kill us. And if traditional Catholicism can do the job, yeah, I'm all for it. I'm a pragmatist in that regard, because I truly believe that European civilization is the greatest thing ever created by man, and it's worth preserving.
And by God.
Yeah.
Well, it's important to say that traditional Catholicism is very much suitable for this because, and the most obvious proof is the Crusades, the Battle of Lepanto, the Second Battle of Vienna, and lots of other, even the Reconquista, which was sometimes a joint European project. So traditional Catholicism is very much suitable for this, both in military and both in scientific terms.
The Reconquista was actually a joint effort by both traditional Catholics and pagans. It just should be mentioned that a lot of pagans also took part in the Reconquista. But anyways, yeah, continue.
No, I would like to add that what people don't understand about the Crusades is that at least the first Crusade was very much a defensive war. Because there was the Muslim peril. So this, for the first time ever, really, this made the the sort of fighting European nations lay down arms and unite against a common enemy. And that's quite inspirational, I think. It should be for us today.
It is, and it will be. I mean, and I think that the current peril that we are facing is going to unite all Europeans, not necessarily on religious basis, because what we're facing is some sort of ethnic civil war, and the dividing line is ethnic rather than religion. Well, the religious aspect is important as well, because we have the Islamization, of course, but I believe that after the smoke has settled after the European ethnic civil war, which is seeming more and more inevitable with every day passing, it will be kind of obvious which tradition will prevail and be the dominant one in Europe, and which will make Europe great again, to kind of use one of my favorite politicians' slogans.
I tend to agree with everything everyone just said, but I have to say, if I'm really speaking honestly, I mean, and I take no joy in saying this, but I see the chances for a revival of traditional Catholicism as sort of the heart of the West as being almost as unlikely as a pagan reconstruction, becoming that. It's just something that people don't respond to anymore. I mean, maybe some catastrophe will drive people back into something more traditional, but it just seems to me, I mean, certainly in the U.S., I mean, Catholicism is strong there, but it's a very liberalized Catholicism, and large parts of the country are very strongly Protestant and evangelical, I just have a tough time seeing traditional Christianity winning, hundreds of millions of people over again. But I could be wrong.
I tell you what, John, if we would get a decent pope, that would change everything.
Yeah, well, certainly. Well, I liked the last one.
Yeah, I mean, he was all right, but he wasn't great. But if we would get sort of a pope of sort of a kind of restoration, that could change a lot.
Well, I hope you're right. Do you see anybody in the wings?
No, I don't. No, I don't. I don't see that in the cards. I'm sorry. But theoretically, yeah.
Well, unfortunately, the most conservative bishops are in the New World, Africa and Asia, and as we could see in the synod on the family, it was thanks to the African and Asian bishops that they said no to the German initiative to allow LGBT recognized somehow. So Cardinal Sarah from Gambia, Cardinal Ranjit from Sri Lanka, Cardinal, what's his name, from Hong Kong. So these are the most conservative ones, unfortunately. We have Raymond Burke in the United States, but he is put apart. I wish he gains an important position once again.
We are getting close to the end of this excellent podcast. And first of all, Youssef, do you have any last words for our listeners before we wrap this up?
I hope Christian solidarity becomes once again as strong as it was in the 12th century. I know it's an utopia, but I am working for this, and I would like to join your efforts to preserve a strong Europe, a culturally rich and faithful Europe to be restored once again, because that Europe is the one which would fight to protect the roots of Christianity, the Christians of the Middle East, and help to survive. So this is what I want to say as a closing idea.
Excellent, and we thank you for those final words, and also all our listeners. Tune in a few days again. Thank you for listening. Bye.